Hello, gardeners. Welcome to today's lesson. So, some of you have already started planting your gardens, which is awesome. I am looking forward to the rest of you planting our gardens and having our gardens started. It's super exciting. If you haven't scheduled a time to plant your garden, let me know in an email. This week I'm free Thursday afternoon and Friday all day. So if you haven't got your garden planted yet, let me know and we'll schedule a time. So with that said, let's get into the lesson. Today's lesson, hold on. Today's lesson is on a healthy garden, keeping a healthy garden, and a healthy planet. Let's get started. So now that we are planting our gardens, some of you already have, there are 4 main responsibilities for taking care of your garden here at the center. Number 1, watering. Number 2, weeding, pruning, and harvesting. So obviously we're not at pruning or harvesting stage yet, but we're going to talk about these first 3 ones, watering, weeding, and pruning today. So let's just get into it. Okay, so starting with watering. I just made a little chart here of the do's and don'ts of watering. So let's look through it. So you're going to want to water early in the morning when sunlight is weakest, the ground is coolest, and foliage will have hours to dry before nightfall. Don't water in the evening when soil is warm and wet. Foliage can attract insects, fungus, and disease. So this is just, it's preferred to water in the morning. If you can't, that's all right. The earlier the better kind of thing. So if you water in the evening, there's not going to be that sunlight drying out the plant, and if that plant has a lot of moisture on it and the soil is really warm and wet, that's like the perfect environment for fungus. So it's more likely that your plants can develop fungus or disease and attract insects if it's warm and wet. So water early in the morning so that your plant is all nice and dry by the time it's the evening. And yeah, so do water deeply and less often so that you reach roots, the part of the plant that needs the nutrients, sugars, and hormones contained in water. So first of all, when there's seeds, which they are right now, you're going to want to water, actually not like this, you're going to want to water more often and less, because seeds need bathing a little bit. So we want to give them more attention. And it's better to have like a sprinkle of water over top so that the seeds don't get dislodged and the water is not too heavy on them. So, but for plants, it's different. For plants, you want to water them, water their roots really, really well. Make sure the soil is nice and moist, and then it's actually recommended to let them dry out a little bit. So don't water them too often. So I'll talk about how often you should water them in a sec. But they actually do well if they dry it out a little bit, because the roots will grow deeper into the soil. And we want that. We want really strong roots. And don't water lightly and often, but you should for seeds, but for plants. Don't water lightly and often, which promotes shallow root growth. So we really want a strong, hardy plant, and that can survive a dry spell or a really hot day, because it does it well, or yeah, it does good for it. Okay. Yes, and the roots. It's important that the roots get the water. That's where they need the water. The leaves don't really need the water, although we might, yeah. So, so we want to make sure that the roots are getting all the water. So direct water at the base of the plant and avoid wetting the foliage, which invites fungus. Like we said before, we don't want to have a soggy plant, as it will attract fungus and disease. So instead of watering with your water can all over the plant, wetting all of the leaves and the stems and everything, try watering right at the base of the plant, around the stem, on the soil, and water it really good. And don't water from overhead. Depending on the size of the plant, the water may never actually hit the ground because the foliage may overshadow the plant's base. So yeah, that's also another reason to water near the ground, because the water might actually just roll off the leaves and not actually get into the roots there. Next, do water container gardens regularly, typically once a day during hot, dry spells. Stick your finger in the soil. If it feels dry all the way to your second knuckle, this one, I didn't actually test this out yet. But yeah, you can also tell if the soil's really dry. I'd say you don't need to water every day. Like I said, the plants, you don't want to water them too much, or their roots won't grow really deep. So every few days max, I'd say, unless it's like really hot, right? This is for the plants, not the seeds. So yeah, stick your finger in the soil. Second knuckle is there, right? Yeah. And if it's dry, then it's time to water. Pretty much you just want to make sure that it's reaching the roots. So yeah, I don't know what I was going to say there. Don't think that container gardens need watering only when everything else does. So container gardens, we're talking about our garden boxes. Those are container gardens. So pots hold heat, so the confined soil dries out faster than garden soil does. So if you have plants in pots around your place, they need more water than your gardens do, because they're in the hot sun, they're drying out, whereas in the ground or slightly above the ground in our garden boxes, it holds the water, or it doesn't, it won't dry out as fast. And if your garden is in the ground, it will dry out even slower. Yeah. So you don't want to overwater it. That's why I say don't water it every day. Okay, next. Do use a watering wand to water annuals and perennials, both in ground and containers. So you don't necessarily need a watering wand, but this is just so that your water, well, it'll say here, don't use a hose and nozzle which casts a wide spray that wets the foliage and not always the ground. So it's better to use a a watering wand, which connects to your hose, rather than having a sprinkler set up, because a lot of that water is going to not reach the plants, first of all, get on the leaves, which we said is not as great. It is okay for leaves to get wet. Obviously, they get wet in the rain, but yeah, we don't want them super wet. And a lot of it, the water, if it's like really spraying, a lot of it's going to evaporate, blow away in the wind. So make sure you're getting that water around the base of your plant into those roots. All right. I think that's all for watering. So let's move on to weeding. So weeding is pretty straightforward. There's 3 steps you could say to weeding. Identify, make sure you can tell the difference between your seedlings, plants, and your seedlings or plants and weeds. So I mentioned this before, that sometimes you're not sure if something is a weed, or it's your actual seedling, or if it's like a grass seedling. So like I said before, research what your seedling or plant will look like as it grows. If you can't tell, it's better to wait than to lose a seedling. If you can't tell if it's a weed or not, just wait and see what happens. Okay, step 2, remove. It is important to get most of the roots out as they can regrow. Avoid pulling from the top of the weed, as it can just break off the top of the plant. You probably remember, if you ever weeded as a child, if your parents ever asked you to pull weeds, you probably just grabbed them and ripped them, and all you got was a handful of the leaves. So that actually won't prevent the weed from coming back as well, obviously, because the roots are still there. So instead, use gloves. Gardening gloves are super handy. You have some here if you need. And loosen the soil around. If it's a really big weed, if it's a really tiny weed, you can kind of just like scoop it out, because the roots are so short. If it's a big weed, loosen the soil around, so that you can get down under it. If you can't do that, pull near the roots, like as low as you can, to get as much leverage as you can, or use a trowel to leverage underneath the roots, dislodging them from the soil. This is my favorite way of doing it. Sticking that trowel underneath all the roots so that you can kind of just like a seesaw, just go pop, and it will just pop up. And then, yeah, it might be clinging onto a lot of dirt. Just, I kind of chop the dirt off and then dispose, which is the next step. Dispose. Weeds can be put into compost or thrown into a bushy area away from the garden to decompose. So if you have like a bush near you and you don't really care if there's weeds in there, if it's all like, can't really see in there, it's all grassy, that's a good place to throw it. You can throw them in the trash, obviously, but it's a plant. It can decompose easily. And if you want to know more about compost, our last lesson, where Erna from Oak Ridge Garden Center came and talked to us, answered some questions. That's on YouTube. That was lesson 3. She has some really good information about compost, which is a great addition to your garden. Okay, some tips for weeding. Weed less and more often. Instead of a full day of weeding once a month, do an hour a week. So if that makes sense, you want to weed just a little bit here and there, instead of leaving them until the weeds have grown super big and super unmanageable. You want to get them while they're small, and then you're not really putting as much strain on your body because you're just pulling out a few here and there. And it's much more manageable that way. Yeah, get the baby weeds early. They're much easier to remove before they grow bigger, that's for sure. I've had some really huge weeds in my lawn that the roots are crazy deep. The weeds are so hardy, you know, they can grow kind of anywhere, that they've grown in such a way as to bypass the regular um, plant. They're just so good at good at going where we don't want them. um, Weed after it rains as opposed to before it rains, because that's when they grow the best. So after rain, you'll probably notice a lot of weeds sprouting up. So if you think it's going to rain, wait till it rains and then pull them up, because you might weed before it rains, and all of a sudden there's a bunch more weeds and you're like, oh, I just weeded. But yeah, that's my tip. If you can't get the roots out, chop off the heads to prevent pollinating for a while. Sometimes they're really stuck in the concrete, and it's okay to just chop them off. It looks better and they won't pollinate as much, or at least for a little while. Don't leave bare spots. Weeds like to fill empty space. Space plants as recommended on their package and mulch unused areas. So I highly recommend using mulch in your lawn or in your garden if you want. Although maybe once your plants grow a bit bigger, it would be better to mulch. So mulch is really great. You can get different kinds of mulch. There's like wood chip mulch, like recycled material mulch. There's a lot of great stuff. Pretty much the weeds have a harder time growing out of the mulch. The mulch another thing is mulch keeps heat in, like we talked about second lesson. Mulch keeps the heat in the dirt, in the soil, and it keeps water in the soil. And so the soil isn't getting dried out. And yeah, mulch just has this protective barrier that I recommend. Yeah, so, okay, so now here comes the little environmentalist in me. We're going to talk about pesticides and herbicides. Herbicides. So you might have asked yourself before, should I use pesticides or herbicides? Well, I did a lot of research on this, and I found a lot of, how do I put this? It was pretty conclusive that there are some dangers associated with herbicides, pesticides, and chemical fertilizers. So these are all like synthetic, like made in a lab, I guess, and just made with chemicals. So yeah, there's dangers associated with these. Especially a chemical used in herbicides like Roundup, which you may have seen. It's sold in stores, greenhouses, all that. It's very, very popular weed killer. Yeah, and it has a chemical called glyphosate, which is linked to many current diseases in humans and animals. So unfortunately, this chemical glyphosate is linked to things like possibly cancer. You know, they're doing lots of research on this. This has been highly researched, and Roundup, glyphosate has been used in fertilizer or pesticides for a very long time, and we've known about the repercussions of it somewhat recently. So yeah, it's linked to some diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's. Well, I can't remember them right now, but the information is readily available on the internet. Let's just see here. So, the Canadian government has listened to a lot of what scientists have said, and they have, so pesticides are tightly regulated in Canada, and herbicides, save for a few, are banned in Canada. So you are actually allowed to buy them online. However, it's not recommended by the government of Canada to use these pesticides and herbicides. Like we said, they're linked to diseases in humans and also negative effects on the environment, and including animals. So some of these pesticides are linked to a decline in bee population, which is a huge concern right now. Bees are very important for our gardens and for all food production. Pretty much, I think it's over half of our food depends on bees pollinating them. So we really need bees. We really need to protect the bees. Also butterflies. These have been harming butterflies as well, which are also important for pollination. And they're beautiful. Nature is beautiful. We should protect it. That's my little soapbox. And yeah, all like animals too, birds, any animals that are consuming this chemical are having diseases. And there's lots of research on that if you're interested in that. Lots of information online. And what was the other thing I was going to say? Yeah, so it is encouraged by the Government of Canada to use as little pesticides as possible and use alternative methods to pest control. So there you have it. Government of Canada is encouraging us to use as little as we can. Unfortunately, we need pesticides for food production. If the whole world started only growing, using or organically growing their food, we would not be able to feed most people. So these pesticides are very important to food production for the world population. And organic farming, they don't use pesticides. It's all organic, right? So it's a necessary evil, right? These pesticides, they boost food production, which we need a lot of. We have a big population, but they're also having negative effects. So actually, the Government of Canada was it Government of Canada or the EU, where it was saying that we need to phase out the use of pesticides. We need to stop using them for the good of the world. So yeah, doing a lot of research on how we can do that. Anyways, so that's my little rant on pesticides. Yeah, so I recommend buying organically when you can from the store. It is more expensive. But yeah, if you're buying produce from the store, I recommend buying organically and locally. I highly recommend that. And unfortunately, a lot of these pesticides are already in our food and in our environment. And these pesticides, spread into the water, into the soil. And so even if you buy something organically that hasn't had pesticides used on it, it can still have trace amounts of glyphosate because the use of pesticides is so widespread. Thankfully, that organic foods don't have a toxic amount of glyphosate. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to eat all our foods if they had toxic amounts in them, obviously. But yeah, that just shows how widespread how widespread it's used, that it's in a lot of our foods. So yeah, rant over. Okay, so alternatives to chemical fertilizers. So these are synthetic fertilizers that you can buy at the greenhouse or wherever you're buying from. Organic fertilizer can be bought at greenhouses and, sorry, my face is in the way, yard work stores, which is usually animal manure that has been composted. So I buy my organic fertilizer from Oak Ridge, like you probably do, and that is made with sheep manure. And because it's composted, it actually doesn't smell. It might have a bit of a smell, but it really doesn't smell like manure. So yeah, it just looks like dirt. You mix it in with your soil and it's really good for your plants. So there are many different types of fertilizer. There are animal-based fertilizers like manure and bone meal and fish meal. There's many different types, and there's plant-based fertilizers if you don't want to use animal products, like compost and cottonseed meal, and there's lots more. Compost is fertilizer. So if you have a compost system at your house, that's great. Once it's broken down and composted, you can use it like a fertilizer, put it in your garden, and it gives lots of nutrients, and it's a lot less wasteful to use composting. So a little side note on composting, it's really easy to start. Actually, like I said before, Erna last lesson had a lot of ideas for composting, so I recommend going over there, and she had some really simple ways to start your own composting. Yeah, so synthetic I forgot to mention, you can also buy ready-made compost at greenhouses, I believe, if you like that. So synthetic fertilizers may work quickly and produce a lot, but it is healthier for your garden to have a balanced ecosystem, and organic fertilizer has better long-term effects. So synthetic fertilizers or chemical fertilizers are like steroids for your garden, kind of. They just make your garden grow really well and produce a lot, but they don't really have long-term good effects. Whereas if you use organic fertilizer, you're not going to have the same instant gratification with your plants as you will with chemical fertilizers, but it's better in the long term because you're creating a natural environment, like it says, balanced ecosystem. Your little ecosystem in your yard, you're nourishing it, and it's going to have long-term effects, and it'll even have better effects in the long term than synthetic fertilizers. Yeah. Organic fertilizer needs microorganisms to break down the organic materials to release the nutrients into the soil. So, chemical fertilizers don't need that. So that's one benefit to chemical fertilizers. So these microorganisms, they need suitable temperatures and water to live. However, once they have these factors, they are fast and efficient. So this just means that if you put, or you can't just put organic fertilizer anywhere and it'll help plants grow. You need to activate it with the right temperature and water, pretty much. So it's just taking care of your soil, pretty much, and those microorganisms will start like breaking down that material. That's like how composting works, and that will release the nutrients into the soil. Yes, which your plants will love. And yeah, so some alternatives to pesticides. So pesticides meaning getting rid of pests. Okay, so there are natural ways to optimize your garden health without the use of pesticides and herbicides, which have been used before synthetic pesticides were invented. So yeah, there was a time when we didn't have synthetic pesticides where obviously we've been farming, humans have been farming forever, right? Although they would have been producing a lot less food because the population was a lot smaller. So yeah, and those methods are tried and true. They still work to this day. So those include alternatives to pesticides include planting a variety of species and rotating the crops deters pests. Sorry. So what I mean by rotating is, especially tomatoes should be rotated every season. So what I mean by that is, if you plant your tomatoes in this one spot, then next year you're going to plant them in another spot and plant something else here, because you want that rotation so that the soil is being enriched, because some plants take and give to the soil in different ways, and so you want to balance that by rotating them, and that can also help prevent disease and pest infestations. Yeah, so healthy plants are more resistant to pests, so maintaining good soil and drainage is important. Yeah, good soil is almost as important as the plants themselves, because that is what keeps the plants alive. So yeah, pretty much just what it says. Take care of your soil, and yeah, make sure you have water drainage. Just means that the water isn't sitting, I guess. I'm not quite sure. Anyways, plant native species and pest deterring plants like marigolds. So, planting native species is really good because they're native. They are naturally occurring here in Manitoba, so they kind of belong here, and so they'll really thrive, and they know the environment, so they'll protect your garden, they'll be good for your garden, and they'll be really hardy and good for the environment. Note about marigolds. They're said to deter pests, but yeah, Erno said last week, like, there's no like definite proof of that, but it's a good idea if you like marigolds. So some native species, and these are marigolds here. Okay, and something we already learned about, companion planting. Use companion planting to create a harmony among the plants, giving them the optimum environment to flourish. Yeah, we've talked about companion planting, it's a tongue twister, and how different plants can benefit each other and just, yeah, help each other out. All right, so some tips to reduce pests instead of using pesticides. Some pesticides may be necessary if you have an intense pest infestation, but there's lots of tips and tricks that you can use to get rid of most pests in gardens. So there are some pests that are actually good for your garden, like ladybugs, birds, earthworms, and bats. So yes, you want ladybugs in your garden. They're really good. They eat aphids and small bugs, so they are very helpful because aphids can be very persistent in your garden. And birds and bats, obviously they eat bugs. So yeah, if you want more birds, I guess you could put some bird houses in your yard. I'm not sure about bats, but yeah, they should be encouraged. Another note about pesticides. Often people will see bugs and they'll go, oh, I need pesticide to get rid of them. And they'll just spray pesticide all over their garden, which actually is probably not productive and is not helping your getting rid of the bugs at all, because a lot of pesticides are very specific to the age of the bug, the type of bug, female or male, and just so you might be doing more harm than good if it's because a lot of us don't really know like how to tell how old a bug is, or like, you know, how to use the pesticide. Really, we haven't been trained, so and actually might, like I said, do more harm than good. Okay, so if you notice aphids, I'll show you a picture of them in a second, and other small bugs on your plants, use a strong spray of water to dislodge them or remove the affected area of the plant. So they like to crowd around on your plant, and yeah, if there's really a big infestation of them, maybe remove like some branches or leaves of your plant. Also, yeah, strong spray of water can get them off there. You can also spray insecticidal soap or horticultural oil, I think I said that right, on plants, which can be bought or homemade. I will talk about that in a sec. Yeah. Larger bugs like slugs, caterpillars, and potato and squash bugs can be picked off and put in a jar of soapy water. Yeah, if you can see them on your plants, then if they're big, like just pick them off. Honestly, that's the best way to get rid of them. That's the most simple way. To deter cutworms, which, like the name sounds, they cut the stem of your plant. Here's a little tip. Put a collar around the stem of your plant made from plastic drink bottles or toilet paper rolls. This way they can't climb or sniff the plant. So yeah, that's a really easy little solution to deter cutworms. Okay, I think the next slide is pictures of some bugs. So if you're squeamish to bugs, look away now and I'll tell you when they're gone. Oh, one more thing. Put an empty tuna can with a beer in it to trap slugs. So this is another interesting tip. Slugs are attracted to beer, and so this is a simple little way to trap them. They'll drink the beer and they will be, I guess it will kill them, I guess, because they can probably get out of a tuna can. Okay, so bugs next. Don't look if you don't like. So this top left corner, this is an aphid. So these are really tiny. By the way, these bugs are like the most common bugs that you might see in your garden. Most common pests. So aphids, they're really tiny. As you can see, it looks like it's sitting on a huge leaf, but it's just super tiny. That one, spray it with water or insecticidal soap. This one in the top right corner is a, I want to say potato bug. Potato bug, they're big enough you can pick them off, along with squash bug, right? And in the bottom left corner here, they're quite big and they can be picked off too. And just to kill them, put them in a jar of soap because we don't want them just coming back. And in the bottom right corner, this is a cutworm. So cutworms, they kind of look like caterpillars actually. So yeah, and caterpillars, they're gonna eat your leaves too, so maybe get rid of those too. And slugs is another thing we don't want. So yeah, those are my tips for getting rid of bugs and preventing bugs. Okay, so I included this slide just so that you know this is an option. Right before actually I started recording this, I looked online and there was some advice saying that actually we shouldn't make homemade insecticidal soap because it's not actually insecticidal. Because if we use dish soap that has degreaser in it, I'll explain in a second. So here's the recipe. Just if you want it, combine 1 cup of oil, any variety, with 1 tablespoon of dishwashing liquid or other pure soap. Be sure to avoid any dishwashing liquids which contain degreaser, bleach, or those that are for an automatic dishwasher. So it might be kind of hard to find dish soap that doesn't have degreaser or degreaser in it. But degreaser is actually not great for your plants because it, like the name sounds, it degreases things, and your plants actually have beneficial wax and oils on them, and by spraying that on all over your plants, it can hurt them and damage them. So this is just my little warning. You can still do this if you want. You can also buy actual insecticidal soap at the store, which will be safe for your plants. Mix 2 teaspoons of this soap mixture per cup of warm water and put in a spray bottle. Mix only what is needed for a 1-day application. Always test a small portion of the plant to make sure it won't harm the plant. Some people use this homemade soap and it works for them. So I personally haven't tried it, but yeah, do what works for you. Yeah, never apply to plants on a hot sunny day as it will burn the plant and possibly kill it. So like I was saying, it's up for debate if this is good for your plants, but if you buy the stuff from the store, it will be safe for your plants. Yeah. Yeah, so how much time do we got? Okay. Alternatives to herbicides. We're almost done. So yeah, so herbicides are obviously for removing weeds. Alternatives to it is remove weeds by hand when you can. That's the easiest way to do it. Honestly, this is more for in your yard, not so much in your garden, I guess, because the herbicides would presumably harm your plants. Yeah, so what I do actually at my house is we use a vinegar solution. So I spray a homemade vinegar solution on weeds if we can't pull them. So like in my driveway, in the cement area, that's where I would spray this on the weeds. It's not as effective as chemical herbicides, but it usually kills them. So it's with 1 part vinegar, 1 part water, and a tablespoon of dish soap. This dish soap. Yeah, it smells like vinegar, but it works. Some people also say pour boiling water on weeds that are in between the cracks of concrete. I think this is not quite as effective, but you could try it. I haven't tried it personally. Yeah, so that is what I gotta say about herbicides. And keep in mind that these alternatives are really environmentally friendly, and they don't contaminate the soil and water, and they don't contribute to pollution. So highly recommend. Yeah, so let's talk about homemade fungicide. So some diseases include blight on tomatoes and mildew on leafy veggies. Yeah. Diseases I wouldn't worry too much about. Yeah, obviously, like we talked about before, mildew can be prevented somewhat by making sure your vegetables aren't really wet. You're watering them properly, like we talked about before, watering the roots, not the leaves, and watering in the early morning so that the foliage isn't too dry or isn't too wet, which can promote mildew. So fungicides help get rid of them. They can be bought at the store or homemade. Here's a homemade fungicide. Combine 1 tablespoon of baking soda and 1 tablespoon of horticultural oil, which you can get at the greenhouse, at your local greenhouse. So dilute in 4 liters of water and spray on the leaves. So right, so stuff like we were talking about pesticides, even like homemade insecticidal soaps or regular insecticidal soaps, you don't want to just spray them all over the plant because it can still be kind of harmful to the plant. You want to just put it in the affected area only if you know that there's those bugs there. And same with fungicide, you want to, put it on the leaves, the plants that are affected by mildew or diseases. So here's one. I haven't tried this one before, so I don't know how effective. I just saw it on a website. I thought it was interesting. So for mildew, you can try putting 1 part water, 1 part milk, and spray on the first sign of mildew and repeat every 3 to 4 days. You can also apply weekly as a preventative measure. I don't know. I haven't used this. I can't confirm it's how well it works, but just an idea. 1 part water, 1 part milk. So you can try it. It's all about experimentation, right? Yeah. So let's talk about pruning quickly here. Almost done. So pruning is very important for tomato plants. Tomato plants need a lot of attention, as we've learned. Yes. So pruning helps the plant grow bigger and stronger, prevent disease and pests, and helps fruit ripen faster with larger harvests. So pruning means to remove the foliage and stems at the bottom of the plant so it and your garden aren't cluttered and can focus on growing productively. So I'm mostly talking about tomato plants here. You want to make sure Pruning is important for tomato plants. So when pruning a tomato plant, like it says, the bottom of the plant, you want to remove the foliage and stems. You can use shears to clip them, or use your hand if they're small, just pull them off. You want a good, I not quite remember, but Erna talks about it actually a little bit in the previous lesson. I think 4 inches, depending on how big your tomato plant is. You want that area open. So by removing the bottom foliage, there's more air circulation and light reaching the bottom, and it discourages pests on the ground and makes them easier to water. So this is why it's important to prune, because if you have a lot of foliage at the bottom, it's not going to get that airflow. It's going to attract insects, fungus, disease, mildew, and we want that light reaching the bottom, and we want to be able to water around the base of the plant, right? Water the roots. It also allows the plant to focus its energy on growing where it matters most. So what I mean by this is, when we have a bunch of little branches on a tomato plant, the tomato plant has its energy spread out through all those little branches. But if we remove the little unnecessary branches, the plant can focus on its big branches and produce that big fruit. So we're kind of just helping the plant focus its energy where it needs it most and produce better. Yeah, so how to prune, pruning how to. It's pretty straightforward. One thing, it's important to thin out seedlings because it helps plants grow stronger. So once you seed your garden, you're going to see little seedlings pop up. And I talked about this in another lesson, but it's important for these seedlings to have enough space, because you'll want to, once you see a bunch of, especially if there's a lot of seeds, like really tiny seeds like lettuce or carrot seeds, you don't want to prune them because you want to give every little seedling a chance. But actually it's better to have fewer, stronger seedlings than many little ones, because they need that area. If they're sharing too much, they're too close together, they're sharing too much nutrients, and they're not going to grow as big. So you want to prune them so that they are, a good space apart. I'd say like about your finger length apart. And also, once they're growing up to be adult plants, look at your handy dandy plant spacing chart that I gave you. That's the chart that has lots of columns on it, and it'll tell you how many plants there should be in a square. And yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, so thinning out is very important to your plant's health and how to optimize your plant. So to prune, oh, by the way, seedlings, if they're too close together and if they're like damaging, or if they're, too close to another seedling, you can use scissors just to cut right at the soil level. That can not disrupt the soil as much if they're really small seedlings. Okay, the reason we plant so many seeds is because a lot of them aren't going to turn into seedlings, and they're really tiny. We can't exactly like do tiny little individual carrot seeds, right? So we're going to just sprinkle them in and then thin them out. Seeds are really cheap. Don't worry about throwing away those little seedlings. It'll be worth it. So remove dead, frostbitten, and diseased leaves. So here's some example of the diseased leaves here. So there's some dead leaves. So plants naturally have some dead leaves, like they're growing new, they have new growth, and then old ones die. And so it's normal to have some, depends on the plant, but it's normal to have some dead leaves. You can just remove those as long as your plant is growing new, has new growth. These leaves that on this picture have been sunburned, I think I want to say. I can't remember, but that's also another cause for dead leaves. Yeah, so you just want to remove them for as soon as possible, because they can actually just like take some of the energy from new growth from the plant. So it's beneficial to remove those sooner rather than later. Same with diseased leaves. You want to remove them as soon as you can, because you don't want that spreading to the rest of your plant. So remove those stems as soon as you are seeing that it's all diseased. You want to remove them. And then if your plant, it might be too late if your plant, if there's a bunch of leaves on the plant, and if you would pull off all the leaves, there wouldn't be much left. You might have to throw that plant away. And it's okay to put those plants in the compost, in the in the trash, in the bushes, wherever. Yeah, so when it comes to frostbitten leaves, don't be as quick. Here, I think I wrote, prune conservatively when frostbitten. So your plant is going to be really sensitive. If it experiences a frost, it's going to be really sensitive. And if you're removing a bunch of leaves, the plant might not have enough energy and could die. So you'll be able to tell if it's frostbitten, and you can prevent this obviously by waiting till the last frost date to plant something, and just babying your plants a lot, taking care of them a lot. Yeah, so I think that's everything. I want to say that's everything. Happy gardening. Yeah. So if you have not planned a time to come to the center and plant your garden with me, then send me an email. Again, I am free this coming Thursday and Friday, Thursday afternoon and Friday all day, and I would love to plant with you. Super exciting, and it's great weather to plant as well. It's good. A good time to plant your garden is a little overcast, not too sunny, not too hot, and like it might rain. So it's a good time. And yeah, so, and once we plant our gardens, because of the restrictions currently, we can't have people in the gardens at the same time. So I'd really appreciate if you emailed or called beforehand to make sure there's no one else there, and we can schedule a time to come, take care of your garden, and yeah. So just call beforehand just to make sure that you can come, or email. All right, thank you guys so much, and I will see you next week. Happy gardening. Bye.